started with a call. One I wasn't supposed to answer. Emma's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was upstairs taking a shower. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe curiosity, maybe intuition. Or maybe it was the strange name flashing on the screen. TW now. I've never been the jealous type. I don't go through phones, I don't ask a million questions. But something about that name felt off. So I answered. The voice on the other end was deep, polished. The kind of voice that commands attention in a room. Hey babe, you free tonight? I froze. Silence hung heavy between us. And before I could even process what was happening, the guy's tone shifted. Emma? I hung up. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing. Babe? Who the hell was this guy? And why was he calling my wife? I put the phone back exactly where it was and leaned against the counter, staring at the marble surface like it held all the answers. But nothing made sense. Nothing except the thudding of my heart in my chest and the growing suspicion that the life I thought I knew was slipping through my fingers. The sound of the shower stopped. Panic set in. I grabbed a dish towel, pretending to clean up the counter, trying to look as casual as possible. My brain was screaming at me to confront her right then and there. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I waited. Emma came downstairs a few minutes later, towel wrapped around her head, looking as put together as ever. She glanced at me with a smile. The same smile she'd given me for years. One that used to feel warm but now felt practiced, rehearsed. Hey, she said, grabbing her phone off the counter without a second thought. She didn't even check it, just slipped it into her pocket and started rummaging through the fridge. I watched her carefully, every movement, every gesture. I wasn't looking at my wife anymore. I was looking at a stranger. Who's TW? I asked casually, keeping my voice steady. She froze for half a second, so brief I almost missed it. But I didn't. Her hand hovered over the fridge door before she turned to me. Face calm, eyes unreadable. What? TW called. I picked up by mistake. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. He called you babe. Emma didn't flinch, didn't stammer, didn't panic the way I thought someone caught in a lie would. Instead, she shut the fridge door and tilted her head slightly, her expression cool and calculating. Thomas, she said smoothly. From work. We've got a project running late and I've been covering for him. That's all. Her tone was light, dismissive, like she wasn't telling me anything unusual. But I wasn't buying it. Since when do you cover for people at work by letting them call you babe? I asked, my voice a little sharper now. Emma sighed, like she was dealing with a child throwing a tantrum. It's just how he talks. He calls everyone that. You're making something out of nothing. There it was. The gaslighting. The subtle twisting of reality to make me doubt myself. But I wasn't falling for it. Not this time. I grabbed my phone from the counter and scrolled to the call log, holding it up for her to see. This doesn't look like nothing. He called you 3 times today. You didn't mention anything about staying late or working on a project. Her eyes flicked to the phone, but her expression didn't change. Instead, she took a step closer, her voice dropping to that low, sweet tone she used when she wanted to end a conversation on her terms. Because I didn't want to worry you. You've been stressed with work lately, and I didn't think it was a big deal. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But my gut was screaming at me to wake up, to stop falling for her carefully crafted lies. Is there something you're not telling me? I asked, my voice quieter now, almost pleading. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt? Regret? Couldn't tell. But then she smiled. That same damn smile. Come on, she said, brushing past me to grab her coffee mug from the cabinet. You're being ridiculous. And just like that, the conversation was over. But something had shifted. I wasn't the same man who blindly trusted his wife. And Emma? She wasn't the same woman I married. The cracks were getting bigger, and this time I wasn't going to ignore them. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stayed awake, replaying the call over and over in my mind. And one thing was crystal clear. Whoever TW was, this wasn't just work. The next morning, Emma was already out of bed by the time I woke up. Her side of the sheets was cold. I heard her in the kitchen, humming to herself as if nothing had happened. That was her specialty. Acting like everything was fine, like I was the crazy one for questioning her. But I wasn't crazy. Something was wrong, and I wasn't going to let it slide this time. I got dressed slowly, trying to steady my thoughts. My mind kept drifting back to that call. "Hey babe, you free tonight?" Those words wouldn't leave me alone. The casual familiarity, the confidence in his voice. This wasn't some coworker calling about spreadsheets. This was something else entirely. By the time I walked into the kitchen, Emma was sipping her coffee, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. She looked up and smiled, all sunshine and innocence. "Morning," she said, like we hadn't had that conversation the night before. I sat across from her, watching her closely. "Got another busy day at work?" She didn't even flinch. "Yeah, meetings all morning. Might have to stay late again." There it is. The same excuse she'd been using for months. "You know," I said, keeping my voice casual, "it's funny. I don't think you've ever mentioned Thomas before. Kind of weird, considering how often you're covering for him." Emma's fingers tightened around her coffee mug, just for a second. But I noticed. "I don't tell you about every coworker," she said, her tone carefully measured. "It's not a big deal." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "It feels like a big deal when he's calling you babe." Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I saw something crack in her perfect facade. Anger? Annoyance? Couldn't tell. But she recovered quickly, setting her mug down with a soft clink. "Do you even hear yourself?" she said, her voice calm but with an edge. "You're acting paranoid." "Am I?" Her phone buzzed on the table between us. We both looked at it at the same time. TW. The air in the room shifted. Emma reached for the phone, but I was faster. I grabbed it before she could, holding it just out of her reach. "Give it back," she said, her voice low, dangerous. "Why? So you can keep hiding whatever it is you're hiding." I stood up, backing away as she stepped toward me. "Who is he, Emma? Really?" Her jaw clenched, and for the first time I saw it. The cracks in her mask. She wasn't calm anymore. She was cornered. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped, her tone sharper now. "It's work. That's all it is." "Then let me read the messages." Her eyes narrowed. No, that one word hit me harder than I expected. "No," I repeated, my voice quieter now. "You won't let your own husband see your phone?" Emma crossed her arms, standing her ground. "Because I shouldn't have to. I'm not a child, and you're not my babysitter. I don't owe you an explanation for every call I get." I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words. She wasn't even trying to lie anymore. She wasn't apologetic, wasn't panicking. She was defiant. And that's when it hit me. She didn't care if I suspected anything, because she thought I wouldn't do anything about it. The phone buzzed again in my hand. Another message from TW. I swiped the screen open, ignoring her protests. The message was short, but it confirmed everything I needed to know. "Miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight." My blood ran cold. I turned the phone around, showing her the message. "Explain this." Emma didn't even blink. Instead, she walked right up to me, her eyes blazing. "You've been going through my phone?" she hissed. "What the hell is wrong with you? Don't twist this." I shot back. "You're cheating on me, Emma. Just admit it." For a moment I thought she was going to deny it, to come up with another excuse, another lie. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled. "You want the truth?" she said, stepping closer until we were inches apart. "Fine. Yes. I've been seeing someone." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "But it's not what you think," she continued, her voice calm again, like we were having a normal conversation. "It's complicated." I laughed bitterly. "Complicated? You've been sneaking around behind my back, and you call that complicated?" Emma shrugged. "It's not just about you, okay? My life doesn't revolve around making you happy." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the woman I thought I knew. She wasn't even pretending to be sorry. "So what now?" I asked, my voice hollow. "You're just going to keep lying? Keep sneaking around?" Emma tilted her head, studying me like she was trying to figure out how far she could push me. "Honestly," she said, "you should probably let it go. Because if you dig too deep, you won't like what you find." And with that, She walked away, leaving me standing there, holding her phone like it was a ticking time bomb. I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't letting this go, and I stood there in stunned silence, her words echoing in my mind like a bad song stuck on repeat. You should probably let it go, because if you dig too deep, you won't like what you find. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I wasn't letting this go. Not after that smug confession. I needed answers. And if she wouldn't give them to me willingly, I'd find them myself. But first, I needed to calm down. I paced the kitchen, trying to piece everything together. Her boldness, that smirk when she admitted to cheating, wasn't normal. Most people caught in a lie panic. They make excuses. Emma? She looked almost relieved, like she'd been waiting for this moment. And that terrified me. After about 20 minutes of pacing and stewing in my own thoughts, I heard the front door open. Emma walked back in, her expression neutral, carrying a couple of shopping bags like it was any other day. "Where'd you go?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Out," she replied, not even bothering to elaborate. I crossed my arms. "You're seriously just going to pretend nothing happened?" She sighed, setting the bags down on the table. "We've been through this. I'm not having the same conversation again." "Same conversation? Oh hell no. You think I'm going to sit here quietly while you run around with?" I grabbed her phone from the counter and held it up. "Whoever the hell this is?" Her eyes flicked to the phone, and for a brief moment, I saw that same cold detachment. Then she gave me a half-smile. Not the warm, familiar one I used to love. No, this was different. Calculated. "You really want to know?" she asked softly, taking a step closer. My heart pounded in my chest. "I think I deserve that much, don't you?" She laughed. An unexpected, bitter sound that made my stomach turn. "Deserve? That's funny. Coming from you." I blinked. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Emma leaned against the table, crossing her arms as if she was settling in for a long conversation. "You think you're the perfect husband, don't you? The loyal guy who works hard, takes care of the house, never makes mistakes." Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "But let's be honest. You've been checked out for years." "Checked out? I've been killing myself to keep us afloat, to give you the life you wanted." She rolled her eyes. "Please. You work, you come home, you sit on your phone or your laptop. You haven't looked at me like you did in the beginning for years. And now you're surprised that someone else did." Her words cut deep, but I wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative. "Don't twist this," I said through gritted teeth. "I've been here. I've been loyal. You're the one who cheated." Emma shook her head, almost like she pitied me. "This isn't about loyalty," she said quietly. "It's about control. You always needed to feel like the good guy, the one who could do no wrong." She smirked. "Well, guess what? Life doesn't work that way." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. "So what? You're saying this is my fault?" "No," she said, tilting her head. "I'm saying it's complicated. More complicated than you'll ever understand." I stepped closer, holding her gaze. "Make me understand, then. Who is he?" Her expression darkened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "You don't want to know," she whispered. "Oh, I do." There was a long pause. Then, with a resigned sigh, she leaned against the table and finally said it. "He's my boss." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "What?" Emma's eyes locked onto mine. No hesitation, no shame. "Thomas Weston, Member of Parliament. You've heard me mention him before." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Her boss? Not just some random guy from work. A powerful, influential man who had been in our orbit for years. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emma didn't flinch. 5 years. The room spun. 5 years. This wasn't some recent fling. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a long-term, deliberate betrayal. 5 years, I repeated, stunned. "And you never thought to, I don't know, end it?" Emma's expression hardened. "It wasn't that simple." "Nothing about this is simple," I snapped. "You've been lying to me for half our marriage. With a politician." She took a step forward, her voice low and dangerous. "Do you have any idea what my life has been like? The pressure? The expectations? The things I've had to do to keep everything together. Oh, don't even start with that, I said, shaking my head. You're not the victim here, Emma. Her eyes blazed with fury. You think I wanted this? You think I enjoyed sneaking around? Hiding? Do you know what it's like to feel invisible in your own home? I opened my mouth to argue, but she wasn't done. He noticed me, she said softly, and there it was. The truth I had been dreading. He made me feel like I mattered, like I wasn't just some boring wife stuck in a routine. I stared at her, feeling a mix of rage, disbelief, and deep, bone-crushing sadness. So what now? I asked, my voice hollow. Are you leaving me for him? Emma didn't answer right away. Instead, she grabbed her coffee mug, took a slow sip, and set it down carefully. No, she said finally. He's not leaving his wife, and I'm not leaving you. I let out a bitter laugh. Wow, that's generous of you. Her expression was unreadable. I told you, it's complicated. I felt something snap inside me. The man who had spent years trying to keep everything together, trying to be the rock, the stable one, he was gone. No, I said firmly. It's not complicated. It's over. Emma's eyes widened slightly. You don't mean that. Oh, I do. I stepped closer, locking eyes with her. 5 years. 5 years you've been lying to me, and you still think you can control how this ends. For the first time, I saw something that looked like fear in her eyes. You don't want a divorce, she said quickly. Think about what that would do to your reputation, your family. I laughed, shaking my head. You really think I care about that right now? You've been screwing your boss for 5 years. The only thing I care about is getting the hell away from you. Emma stood there, speechless for once. And as I walked out of the kitchen, I heard her voice behind me, low and venomous. You're making a mistake. I didn't look back. The mistake had already been made. By her. I didn't sleep that night. After the confrontation in the kitchen, I grabbed my coat and left the house, needing air, space. Anything to keep me from completely losing it. I drove aimlessly through the city, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. 5 years. 5F*******ng years she'd been lying to me. And not just with anyone. With a member of parliament. A man who shook hands with world leaders, who smiled for cameras, who gave speeches about integrity and values. The hypocrisy made me sick. Around 3 a.m., I parked in a quiet lot by the river and just sat there, staring at the water. My mind was spinning with questions, but one kept rising to the surface. How did I miss this? Was I blind? Naive? Or had I just refused to see what was right in front of me? I thought back to all the times Emma had come home late, all the unexplained trips and cryptic text messages. The way she'd started dressing a little sharper, paying more attention to her appearance. The moments where she'd zone out during dinner, lost in her own thoughts. The signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to believe them. But now there was no denying it. This wasn't a mistake or a one-off fling. This was a carefully managed double life. And the worst part? She wasn't even sorry. By the time I got home, the sun was rising. The house was quiet, but I could feel her presence. I walked upstairs, expecting to see her asleep in our bed. But the bed was empty. I found her in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed with her arms crossed. She'd been waiting for me. You're back, she said, her voice cold. I didn't respond right away. I leaned against the doorframe, studying her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't panicked. She looked calm, collected, like someone who had already decided what they were going to say. We need to talk, she said. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, now you want to talk? After 5 years of lies. Emma stood up slowly, walking toward me. There was no trace of guilt or remorse in her eyes. Instead, there was something else, control. This doesn't have to get ugly, she said softly. I narrowed my eyes. Ugly? You think this is about keeping things pretty? She sighed, like she was already tired of the conversation. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But you need to think carefully about what happens next. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. She crossed her arms, her gaze steady. You think divorcing me is going to fix this? It won't. You'll destroy both of our lives. The press will eat it up. And Thomas. She gave a bitter smile. He'll deny everything. You'll be the bitter husband who couldn't handle his wife's success. I felt my blood boil. Success? You call sneaking around with your boss for 5 years success? Emma took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I did what I had to do. You wouldn't understand. Try me. For a moment, she hesitated. I saw something flicker in her eyes. Something dark. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. It wasn't about love, she said quietly. It was about survival. I stared at her, stunned. Survival? You weren't trapped in some life-or-death situation, Emma. You had a husband who loved you. A home. A life. And it wasn't enough, she snapped, her mask slipping for the first time. I wanted more. I needed more. There it was. The truth. Emma wasn't the victim. She wasn't some damsel in distress, forced into a bad decision. She made a choice, a deliberate, selfish choice, because she wanted power, attention, validation. You're unbelievable, I said, shaking my head. Do you even hear yourself? You threw away our marriage for more? More what? Money? Influence? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. I took a step closer, glaring down at her. You could have told me. You could have walked away if you were unhappy. But instead, you lied to me for years. Emma's expression hardened. And what would you have done if I told you the truth? You would have left. You would have ruined everything. I'm ruining everything? I barked out a laugh. You already did that, Emma. You've been sleeping with your boss. A married politician, no less, and you think I'm the problem. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked away, her jaw clenched. That's what I thought, I muttered, turning to leave. But before I could walk out the door, she said something that stopped me cold. I still have the photos. I froze. Slowly, I turned back to her. What photos? Emma's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a glint of malice. The ones you sent me. Remember those late nights when you travel for work? The photos you sent to keep things interesting. My stomach dropped. You wouldn't. She shrugged, a cold smile playing on her lips. Like I said, this doesn't have to get ugly. I felt the walls closing in. She wasn't just trying to protect herself. She was prepared to burn everything to the ground if it meant keeping control. I don't recognize you anymore, I said quietly. Emma tilted her head. Maybe you never really knew me. And with that, she turned and walked back into the guest room, closing the door behind her. I stood there, staring at the closed door, my mind racing. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. Emma thought she had me cornered. She stood there, smug behind that closed door, thinking her threats would keep me quiet, thinking she could blackmail me into submission. But what she didn't realize, what she never understood, was that I wasn't the same man she married. Not anymore. I left the house again. I needed a plan. I drove to the one place I knew I could think clearly. A bar downtown that I used to go to before we got married. It was dark, quiet, and most importantly, anonymous. No one would notice me there. I sat at the bar, ordered a whiskey, and pulled out my phone. The message from TW was still there. The smug little bastard hadn't even bothered to hide his tracks. Miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight. I stared at those words for a long time before finally opening the text thread. There were dozens of messages, some short and harmless, others not so much. You drive me crazy. Last night was unforgettable. I hate sneaking around, but I can't stop. The timestamps told the real story. Late night messages, weekend rendezvous, times when Emma had claimed she was working late or staying at a friend's. My hands trembled as I scrolled through. But I wasn't just angry. I was calculating. If Emma wanted war, she was going to get it. I knew exactly what I needed to do. A few hours later, I was parked outside a sleek government building, Thomas Weston's office. The lights were still on, and I knew he'd be working late. Politicians always do. I waited, watching the entrance like a hawk. And then, right on schedule, I saw him. Tall, well-dressed, with that practiced politician's charm that made him look trustworthy to the public. But I knew better. I knew what he really was. A snake in a suit. I stepped out of my car and walked straight up to him. Thomas Weston? I called out. He turned, surprised to see someone approaching him this late. His eyes flicked over me, trying to place me. Yes, he said cautiously. I didn't waste time. I held up my phone, showing him the messages he'd sent to my wife. His face paled instantly. "I think we need to talk," I said, my voice cold and steady. Weston looked around, as if checking to see if anyone was watching. When he realized we were alone, he straightened his tie and forced a smile. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" I took a step closer. "What's inappropriate is you sleeping with my wife for 5 years. His jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." I chuckled bitterly. "Oh, come on. Don't insult my intelligence. I've got the messages. I've got the dates. Hell, I've even got photos." That wiped the smug look off his face. "What do you want?" he asked quietly, his voice losing some of its composure. I crossed my arms. "I want the truth. No more lies. No more excuses." Weston glanced around again, then gestured toward a nearby bench. "Let's talk." We sat in tense silence for a moment before he finally spoke. "I'm not proud of what I've done," he said, his voice low. "Emma and I, it just happened. 5 years isn't something that just happens." He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Look, it started out as a work thing. Long hours, late nights. One thing led to another. And you never thought to stop." I pressed. He shook his head. "I tried. We both did. But it wasn't that simple." I leaned forward, glaring at him. "Do you love her?" Weston didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared down at his hands, his expression conflicted. "No," he said finally. "It was never about love." I clenched my fists, barely able to contain my rage. "Then what was it about?" Weston looked me straight in the eye. "Power." I froze. "I'm not talking about political power," he clarified. "I'm talking about the kind of power that comes from knowing someone's secret, from having something no one else has." I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just an affair. This was a game to him, a twisted power play. "You used her," I said quietly. He nodded. "And she used me." Those words hit me harder than I expected. "She's not innocent in this," Weston continued. "Emma's smart, ambitious. She knew exactly what she was doing." I stood up, feeling like I couldn't breathe. "You're both disgusting." Weston sighed, standing as well. "I never meant for it to get this far." "Well, it did," I snapped. "And now you're both going to pay for it." He frowned. "What are you planning to do?" I smiled coldly. "Let's just say, you'll want to keep an eye on the news." Weston's eyes widened in fear, but before he could say anything else, I turned and walked away. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But now I had the upper hand, and I wasn't afraid to use it. I've never been a vindictive man. I never cared much for revenge or games. But this wasn't about getting even. This was about taking back control. I drove home after my meeting with Weston, my mind racing. His words kept replaying in my head. She used me. Emma knew exactly what she was doing. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't love or lust or some messy mistake. It was strategy, manipulation. Emma wasn't a victim. She was an architect of her own betrayal. And that changed everything. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The house was dark and quiet when I walked in. Emma was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up when she heard me, her face calm, unreadable. "You've been out late," she said. I didn't respond. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and stood there for a moment, letting the tension build. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, steady. "I talked to Thomas." The glass of wine froze halfway to her lips. "What?" I walked back into the living room, taking a seat across from her. I set my beer down on the table, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees. "You heard me," I said. "I talked to him, outside his office." Emma's eyes flickered with something. Panic? No, not quite. It was more like calculation. She was already figuring out how to play this. "What did he say?" she asked carefully. I smiled coldly. "Oh, the usual. He regrets everything. It wasn't about love. Blah, blah, blah." I leaned back. "But what really stood out?" "He said you knew exactly what you were doing." Emma's expression didn't change, but I saw her grip tighten around the wine glass. "And you believe him?" she asked, her voice smooth, controlled. I shrugged. "I don't know what to believe anymore, but here's what I do know." I leaned forward again, locking eyes with her. "I'm done playing your games. You've been lying to me for years. You've been hiding behind your job, your excuses, your mask. But it's over now. I'm done." For the first time, Emma looked genuinely rattled. She set her wine glass down, folding her hands in her lap. "So, what's your plan?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Divorce? You want to destroy everything we've built?" I chuckled. "Everything we've built? Emma, the only thing you've been building is a web of lies." Her eyes narrowed. "You're overreacting." "No, I'm waking up." We stared at each other in silence for a long moment. Then, slowly, Emma's lips curled into a smile. "You think you've won," she said softly. "But you haven't. You don't understand how this works." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, my voice deadly calm. "I understand that you think you can control me, that you think your little threats will keep me in line. But let me tell you something, Emma. I'm not afraid of you anymore." Her smile faltered. "Tomorrow morning," I continued, "I'm going to see a lawyer. And you know what else? I'm meeting with a reporter." Emma's eyes widened. "What?" I leaned back, taking a sip of my beer. "Yeah. Turns out, people are very interested in hearing about a member of parliament having a 5-year affair with his employee. I'm sure his career will survive the scandal. Right? You wouldn't," she whispered. "Oh, I would." Emma stood up, her hands trembling slightly. "You'll ruin yourself too. You'll be dragged into it. Your name, your reputation. It'll all be in the headlines." I shrugged. "Maybe. But at least I'll be free." She stared at me, her mind racing. I could see it in her eyes. She was calculating, trying to figure out her next move. "You don't want this," she said, her voice softer now. "Think about everything we've been through, everything we've built together." I shook my head. "I thought we built something real. But you burned it to the ground." Emma took a step closer, her voice low, almost pleading. "We can fix this. We don't have to let it end like this." I stood up, towering over her. "It already ended, Emma. The moment you chose him over me." She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. "I'm done listening to your lies. Done being your backup plan. Tomorrow, the world is going to know exactly who you are." Her face twisted with anger. "You'll regret this." "No," I said, walking past her toward the stairs. "You will." I didn't look back as I walked up to the bedroom, leaving her standing there in the dark. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. And I wasn't stopping until the whole damn house of cards came crashing down. Morning came fast. Too fast. I barely slept. My mind was stuck on the confrontation with Emma. Her words, her threats, that thinly veiled warning. "You'll regret this." But I wasn't backing down. Not now. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in a lawyer's office downtown. The place smelled like leather and coffee, and the walls were lined with framed degrees and serious-looking books. My lawyer, Andrew Keller, had that sharp, no-nonsense demeanor I needed right now. "So, what's the story?" he asked, folding his hands. I took a deep breath and told him everything. The affair, the messages, the blackmail, even the fact that Emma was involved with a high-profile politician. I laid it all out, no sugarcoating. Andrew listened carefully, nodding every now and then, taking notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against his desk. "Well," he said finally, "you've got quite the mess on your hands." "No kidding. But," he continued, "it's not hopeless. We can proceed with the divorce quietly, or—" He gave me a pointed look. "We can go public." I knew what he meant. Leverage. If I wanted to make this hurt, if I wanted to bring Weston and Emma down, I had the ammunition. But it wasn't a decision to take lightly. "I need to think about it," I said. Andrew nodded. "Take your time. But just know, once this goes public, there's no turning back." I left the office feeling more conflicted than ever. I wasn't a vengeful person by nature, but damn it, they'd earned this. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello." A familiar voice came through the line. Calm, confident, and absolutely infuriating. "Mr. Carter," Thomas Weston said smoothly, "I believe we need to talk." We met at a private lounge downtown, the kind of place politicians and CEOs go to avoid the public eye. Weston was already seated when I arrived, sipping an espresso like he didn't have a care in the world. When he saw me, he stood, offering a handshake. I ignored it and sat across from him. "Let's skip the pleasantries," I said. "Why the hell are you calling me?" Weston smiled faintly, taking a sip of his coffee. "Because we both know this situation is delicate, and neither of us wants it to spiral out of control." I stared at him, disgusted by his composure. "Delicate? You've been sleeping with my wife for 5 years. There's nothing delicate about that." He sighed. "Look, I'm not here to make excuses. I made a mistake. Several, in fact. But we're at a crossroads now. We can either escalate this, destroy both of our lives, or we can find a solution." "A solution?" I scoffed. "You mean cover it up?" Weston shrugged. "Call it what you want. The truth is, no one wins if this goes public. Not you, not Emma, and certainly not me." He leaned forward, his tone dropping to something more serious. "But if you're willing to walk away quietly, I'm prepared to make it worth your while." There it was, the offer. "How much?" I asked, my voice cold. Weston didn't flinch. 500,000. I laughed bitterly. "You think you can buy me off for $500,000? That's pocket change to you." He spread his hands. "It's a starting point. We can negotiate." I stood up, shaking my head. "I'm not interested in your money." Weston's expression darkened. "Then what do you want?" "I want you to suffer," I said, my voice low. "I want your career to burn. I want the world to know exactly who you are." For the first time, Weston's composure cracked. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "You think you're in control, but you're not. This will ruin you too." "Maybe," I said, turning to leave. "But at least I'll have the truth on my side." When I got home, Emma was waiting for me. She was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, her face a mix of anger and something else, fear. "Thomas called," she said as soon as I walked in. "Of course he did." She stepped closer, her voice low. "What did he offer you?" "Money," I said flatly. $500,000. Emma's eyes widened slightly. "And I told him to shove it." Her face twisted with frustration. "You idiot. Do you have any idea what you've done? You think this is just going to hurt him? It's going to blow back on all of us." "I don't care," I said, stepping closer until we were face to face. "I'm done protecting you, done covering for you. This is on you, Emma." She glared at me, her voice dripping with venom. "You're going to regret this." "Funny," I said, smiling coldly. "That's exactly what Thomas said." Emma's mask slipped completely then. Her calm, calculated demeanor gave way to raw anger. "You think you're some kind of hero? You think people are going to see you as the victim? Newsflash, Carter, nobody cares about the scorned husband. They'll spin it. They'll say you couldn't satisfy me, that you pushed me into his arms." I shrugged. "Let them say what they want. At least I won't be living a lie." Emma shook her head, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "You have no idea what you're doing." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing." I grabbed my phone and opened my messages. There, sitting in my drafts, was an email to a journalist. Attached were screenshots of Weston's texts, along with a detailed account of everything I'd uncovered. Emma's eyes widened in horror as she saw me hit send. "What did you just do?" she whispered. "I told the truth," I said calmly. "Let's see how complicated things get now." Emma's face twisted in rage. "You bastard." "Yeah," I said, turning to leave. "I guess I am." As I walked out the door, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The fallout came faster than I expected. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Headlines screamed across news sites. MP Thomas Weston caught in extramarital affair with staffer. Political scandal rocks Parliament. Power, deception, and betrayal. Inside the Weston affair, Emma and I sat in the living room, the TV flickering in front of us. She was stone-faced, staring at the screen as if she could will it all away. But I saw the tension in her hands, the way her fingers tapped anxiously against her leg. Weston has yet to comment, but sources close to the MP say he is considering resignation. Emma grabbed the remote and switched the TV off with a sharp click. Happy now? She spat, turning to me. I took a sip of my coffee, calm as ever. Ecstatic. Her eyes burned with fury. You've ruined everything. Do you get that? My career, my reputation, everything I worked for. You ruined it, I said, my voice cold. The moment you decided to play house with Weston. Emma stood, pacing the room. You think this is over? It's not. They'll dig. They'll twist it. And you'll be dragged through the mud right along with me. I don't care, I said flatly. At least now everyone knows the truth. Emma stopped pacing, turning to face me. There was something different in her expression now. The anger was still there, but behind it, desperation. What do you want, Carter? She asked quietly. Why are you doing this? I stood, setting my coffee down. I already told you. I'm done playing your game. I'm done being the fool. She shook her head, laughing bitterly. You think you're the hero in this story, but you're not. You're just as broken as the rest of us. Maybe, I said, stepping closer, but at least I'm not a liar. Emma's eyes narrowed. So what now? You're just going to walk away? Throw everything we built in the trash? I tilted my head, studying her. You keep saying we, but this was never we, was it? It was always you, your plans, your ambitions, your lies. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. I loved you, Emma. I would have done anything for you, and you threw it all away. For the first time, her expression softened. There was a flicker of something, regret maybe, but it was too little, too late. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. I laughed, shaking my head. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed me. Silence hung between us, heavy and suffocating. Then, Emma took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. The mask slipped back into place. Well, she said coolly, I hope it was worth it. I grabbed my coat, heading for the door. As I reached for the handle, I glanced back at her one last time. It was. The weeks that followed were chaos. Weston resigned within days. His political career was over, his name forever tainted by scandal. Emma? She vanished from the public eye. No interviews, no statements, just a carefully crafted silence. And me? I filed for divorce. The process was messy, painful, and drawn out. Exactly what you'd expect from a marriage built on lies. But I didn't care. Every signature, every court date was a step closer to freedom. One night, months later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Hello. There was a pause, then a familiar voice. Carter. It was Emma. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice steady. What do you want? She sighed. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't respond. I've been thinking a lot, she continued, about everything, about us, and I know I can't fix it, but I needed you to know. I never stopped loving you. For a moment, I let her words hang in the air. I thought about the woman I used to love, the life we'd built, the years I'd spent trying to hold on to something that was already gone. But that life was over. I don't believe you, I said quietly. There was silence on the other end. Goodbye, Emma. I hung up. I stood by the window looking out at the city lights. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The house had burned down, and I'd walked away from the ashes.